Hi, it's Dwyer. dwyercrime.blog, a free site. Also, wealthspinning.blogspot.com, a free site. Today is November 13th, 2025. Let's talk about the conviction of Jeremy Bamber for purportedly killing 5 members of his family. This is a family annihilation case. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Now, folks, in the early morning hours of August the 7th, 1985, Nigel Bamber, 61, his wife June Bamber, 61, their 27-year-old former model daughter, Sheila, 27, and her 6-year-old twin sons, Daniel and Nicholas, were shot dead at Nigel Bamber and June Bamber's White House farm in Essex, England. Jeremy Bamber calls the police. Jeremy Bamber was their 24-year-old son. Now, it's important to know that Jeremy Bamber was not supposed to be a part of the festivities at the home of his father, right? While the parents are meeting with their daughter and her 2 6-year-olds, Jeremy Bamber is someplace else. He calls police. He claims he received a frantic call from his father, Neville, shortly before 3:30 a.m., claiming that his sister, who was a diagnosed schizophrenic, who had mental health problems, Sheila's gone crazy, and she's got the gun. Right? Jeremy then says that he drove from his cottage, which was 3 miles away from the farm. Right? The police show up at his father's White House farm's home. Right? They surround the house. 4 hours later, they enter the house, right? Because there was a sense of emergency. Somebody might be in the house with a firearm. About 4 hours later, the police enter the house and find the 5 dead bodies. Again, it's Neville, June, Sheila, and her 2 twin sons, Daniel and Nicholas. Right? When they go in the house, they find the father shot 8 times. Right? The mother is shot. The kids both are shot 3 or more times in the head. They also find Sheila. She's been shot twice. She has a .22 Anschutz rifle laying across her body. Right? The police at first, upon hearing of her psychiatric problems from her 24-year-old brother Jeremy, who had called the cops, right? The police at first thought it was a murder-suicide. Now, you have camps that have developed. Right? Jeremy ultimately gets convicted of the 5 homicides. But you have camps that have developed. One camp believes they found the right guy. The other camp believes that this was a miscarriage of justice. Now let's talk about this case. Just understand that I have no doubt, as I make this video, that Jeremy Bamber killed his family. Because, as often happens, in murder cases, while the murderer thought of 98% of things. Right? It's clear that this murderer thought about this crime beforehand, made sure that he had an explanation as to why he wasn't at the house. He wasn't supposed to be. Right? His family was meeting without him. Right? He has, the story framed where when the cops arrive, they already know about his sister's mental health past, right? They already know that she's had mental health problems, right? But he overlooked some important variables here. And I believe before we get lost in narratives on any case, you need to look at the logistics. What could have happened and what didn't happen. Now let me just say, Sheila is found with the gun draped on her. Right? Just understand that where the father kept his guns, in a little closet area, just understand that there was a silencer. The crime doesn't make sense without a silencer being used. Understand, the silencer that was found after this horrible series of murders had blood on it. In other words, this was the silencer that was used in the crime. Now let's make a couple of points here. Sheila couldn't have shot herself, couldn't have committed suicide, and then taken the silencer off the gun, walked over to the cabinet where the firearm material was, leave the silencer there, walk back over to where her body was found, lay the gun on her, and die. That's not possible. In other words, the killer here realized that, should have realized that removing the silencer from the rifle was a mistake. If you're going to make this look like a murder-suicide, that silencer has to stay on the rifle. Right? The minute you take the silencer off the rifle, the person who is underneath the gun couldn't have killed themselves. The fact that the rifle had blood, the fact that the silencer had blood inside of it, the fact that the silencer was wet, shows you that the silencer was used that night. Let's go further. The murders don't make sense without a silencer. You have two kids sleeping in a bedroom, right? The two 6-year-olds. One is shot 5 times while they slept, right? The other shot 3 times. Without a silencer, the gunshots would wake up the kids, right? The other kid wouldn't be found in their bed. People would have heard the gunshots. They would have jumped out windows. They would have made a run for it. This house was out in the country. But what you have is the opposite here. You have people being shot multiple times. As I mentioned before, the father shot 8 times. So you have someone who is walking around the house, reloading, firing numerous shots, and not alerting the others in the house to the fact that people are getting killed. So the silencer is a key piece of equipment here. Well, let me just say, I believe the killer belatedly realized that he had to hide the silencer. Because with the silencer on the rifle would have been too long for 27-year-old Sheila to use to kill herself. In other words, the silencer adds several inches to the gun. The gun is a rifle. We're supposed to believe that Sheila has this rifle and contorts it so she's able to kill herself. That would mean that she would have to squeeze the trigger from several inches away. With the silencer, the gun becomes too long. I believe Jeremy Bamber realized that. And so he unscrews the silencer, because if Sheila couldn't kill herself, then somebody else killed Sheila. If everybody else is dead in the house, then it would be an outsider, and the effort to frame his psychiatric sister for the murders would fall apart. There are other problems here. Sheila, a suicide victim, is shot twice. Now, there are some experts who believe that that could have happened, that it's possible that she could have shot herself twice. But let's just say, folks, the likelihood of that happening, right? Anything's possible. Let's just say the likelihood of that happening is greatly reduced if you believe she's the one who shot herself. In other words, she's supposed to have killed 4 people, turned the gun on herself, a gun that's too long with a silencer. Right? She then turns the gun on herself and shoots herself, and that's not enough. She's still alive. So she's able to re-angle the gun to shoot herself again. Folks, the double shooting by a suicide victim just sounds unbelievable to me. Right? Let's go further. Sheila, former model, prided herself on her long nails. She has nails, they're manicured, and they're long. Right, folks? All of her nails are in pristine condition. Right? Folks, more than 20 shots were fired in the house that night. By the way, none of them missed. Right? More than 20 shots. Her nails aren't cracked. I don't believe the killer thought of that. Right? The killer thought, hey, my sister's mental. Let me lay the gun on her. Realize, wow, this gun's too long with the silencer. Let me take the silencer off and let me place the silencer where Dad keeps his firearm stuff. Right, folks? I think the killer overlooked, until the moment where he realized he had to take off the silencer, the fact that his sister's nails were in too good a condition to have fired a rifle more than 20 times. Let's talk about some other problems. You heard me mention that none of the shots missed. Sheila, the alleged shooter, had little experience with firearms. In other words, this is someone who loads the gun, right, with nails. Hard to do that. Loads bullets into the rifle, goes around, is killing everyone, doesn't have an errant shot. doesn't hurt their hands, knows exactly what to expect. Folks, the person who did this killing had extensive experience with firearms. You know who did? Jeremy Bamber. Right? He's trying to blame his sister, who's supposed to have been in some delusional state. Right? If you believe Jeremy's claim that his father called him and said, Sheila has the gun out. Right? So the sister is agitated. She's mental and she's agitated. I'm supposed to believe that in that state, with little firearm experience, she does not miss a shot. Right, folks? I don't buy it. Right? I don't buy it. In other words, the silencer removed from the gun, I don't think Sheila did that. Right? Placing the silencer back where Dad kept his firearm stuff. You know what? If Sheila has just killed Dad and Mom, I don't think that's something she would do, especially since she has no Jones for guns. Right? No, the person who did that is someone who had Jones for guns. Her brother. Right? Let me say this also. Sheila had friends. Sheila, for all her mental health challenges, had friends who, across the board, believed that she loved her children. Right? Sheila loved being a mom. Right? She had problems with her husband. She didn't have problems with the boys. The boys loved going out to White House Farms. That's one of the reasons why Sheila's there with them. Right? The idea that Sheila, because of conflict with her parents, is going to take that out on her children, I think is remote. The kids meant too much to her. You know who didn't have children? Her brother Jeremy. Right? Jeremy, let's just say, if you look at films of his emotional reactions, I believe you might conclude that his affect is not normal. You might guess that this guy might be a psychopath. Let's pivot here. Let's look into his past. Right? His parents had a property that was involved in some kind of business. Understand, the parents were wealthy. Right? The parents had more than 400,000 pounds in terms of assets. Well, Jeremy's girlfriend, and let's be upfront here, the girlfriend received $25,000 from News of the World to give her part of the story. I'm going to downplay her for purposes of this video because I believe the forensic evidence by itself is compelling. Right? I believe the fact that the alleged suicide victim was shot twice. The fact that the silencer was taken off the gun and hidden in the room where the father kept firearms. Right? I don't even believe you have to get into the salacious parts of the case to know that Jeremy's responsible. Well, just understand, the girlfriend testified that Jeremy burglarized his parents' business. Right? That she participated in the burglarization of the parents' business. Now, that's the kind of story that someone can't lie about, can't make up out of thin air. Right? There's a school of thought that the girlfriend was upset because Jeremy didn't marry her. Right? But understand, either this business was burglarized or it wasn't. right? If I break up with my girlfriend and then I say, hey, she burglarized this place. If the place wasn't burglarized, then I'm alone, right? The place has to have been burglarized. And if I'm going to make that claim and if I'm going to involve myself in the burglary, then I need to know facts about that burglary. Here, Jeremy's girlfriend, Julia Mugford, knew facts about the burglary. Jeremy's stealing from his own family, but yet when the police talk with him and they say to him, how was your relationship with your parents? He, of course, misrepresents it. Here's a guy who's stealing from his family. And he, of course, claimed that he was on great terms with his parents. Right, folks? That's unbelievable. Right? This is like your kid. Claiming he's on great terms with you while he's robbing your business. It doesn't work. Let's also use common sense here. It's 3 a.m. or so. My daughter, who has psychiatric problems, grabs a gun, somehow gets it loaded. Right, again, she has nails. I believe this was overlooked by the real killer. Right, the idea of her loading the gun is remote as it is. Right, the gun was a load for people with no nails. Here you have a woman with manicured, painted nails. Right? You know the way it is. If you care a lot about your manicure, even if you have some ridiculous idea about loading a firearm, you're going to think, oh, this is going to mess up my nails. Right? Suddenly common sense is going to enter the picture. You're going to say, oh man, this is going to wreck the manicure I just paid a lot of money for. Even if you ran that red light, your nails would look like you loaded a gun. Again, here, Sheila's nails are flawless. Let's also talk about the dad. It's 3 or so in the morning. Daughter, who's a schizophrenic or has recently been diagnosed as a schizophrenic, takes out a gun and is threatening the family. Somehow, dad's able to get by a phone. Who's his one call to? Folks, I think it would be to police, wouldn't it? I mean, someone in the house has a gun, is threatening everyone, including her own kids. Right? How they're being threatened, who knows, right? Because they're lying in bed. But she's threatening to hurt everyone. You get by a phone, aren't you going to call 911? Aren't you going to say, please get cops here, person with gun, give the address and hang up? You're not going to call your son and then give some explanation where you say, hey, Sheila has a gun out and blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not calling the son. Right? I mean, understand, the relationship's so strained that 5 people from the family are at the house and the son's not one of them. Let me tell you, too, there's a great show right now on television. I want to say Amazon Prime. But look up this case. You'll come across this show. There's a very important person on the show. It's the son's best friend. Right? Very important. Right? Young guys have mates. Right? I believe this guy's even more important than the guy's girlfriend. Right? Because this guy is able to talk about how his buddy, of course, was using cocaine. Right? This guy is able to talk about how his buddy at one point may have been involved in a drug deal. In other words, folks, before the murders, just understand that Jeremy Bamber, who looks like he's straight out of a Brooks Brothers catalog, right? The guy has that British aristocratic look, right? He's not an aristocrat. This is a guy who was stealing from his family. This was a guy who was using coke. This was a guy who was smoking cannabis. Now, I'm not here to suggest that everyone who uses coke or everyone who, lights up a joint is capable of killing 5 people, right? But read the tea leaves here. His father wanted him to take over the family farm. This guy wanted to run the streets in London. And when he ran the streets with his good friend, the streets included cocaine. Right? This is a guy who needed money. How do we know that? Folks, you don't burglarize the family business unless you need money. Right? There's too much overhang, isn't there? Aren't you looking at people in the family and thinking, man, if I ever rob from Dad, how could I ever come back here and look him in the face? What the hell is Thanksgiving going to look like? What about Christmas? How would I come back from this? Right? I'm not 13. I'm 24 years old. Right? I rob from Dad now, and, Dad might say, hey, player, don't come back over here. You're an adult now. We did our job. You're voting age. Find somebody else to rob. Right? So just understand, Jeremy, who is well presented, was a troubled soul. He's a troubled soul. So then we get to the sensational part of the case, and people have different thoughts on this. Jeremy's girlfriend, the one he didn't marry, right, came forward after a month had passed. This is after the bodies were found and the police assumed that the sister, who was recently diagnosed as a schizophrenic, Sheila, on who the gun was found, did the murders as part of some murder-suicide. Right? Jeremy's girlfriend doesn't step forward for weeks. Then she steps forward. Now, what's her motivation? Is it, I have a secret I need to share, because if I don't share it, a major injustice will happen? Right? Is it, someone told me something, they're dangerous, they're unhinged, they're a psychopath, I don't feel safe. If I don't tell law enforcement what this person told me, then I might end up like the 5 members of his family. Or is it, this SOB didn't marry me. He used me. He took up some of the best years of my life. I go public now, payback's B. He's going to end up in prison. He won't be able to abuse another woman like he abused me. I'll get back at him, and who knows? Maybe the British press, this is the 80s, right? People were paid for stories. Maybe the British press is financially going to make it worth my while. Well, just to understand, Jeremy's girlfriend comes forward and she talked about how Jeremy openly fantasized about killing his family. How Jeremy thought he would be able to get away with the perfect murder. That Jeremy thought he could pin it on his mentally troubled sister. Right? Well, here's what we know. I want people to consider how this story is structured. Right? It's Jeremy's story. Not Dad's, because Dad's no longer with us. Dad's one of the murder victims. It's Jeremy's story that Dad calls him early in the morning to say that his sister has out a gun. Right? When the cops arrive, Jeremy tells the cops, that his sister is mentally unstable. In other words, from the outset, a key part of this case is Jeremy trying to link his sister to two things: a gun and mental health problems. Right? That's front and center. A gun and mental health problems. Then, of course, even if the cops were clueless, where's the gun lying? It's lying on the sister. Now, of course, I believe the scene's staged, because the gun is missing the silencer. Who removed the silencer? Worse yet, who would remove the silencer and then put it back in the gun room? Right? I believe it's someone who saw the gun on his sister, right after shooting his sister twice. Not once, but twice. Then realized, you know what? In staging this silencer makes the gun too long. Right now, if it's a third-party killer, someone unknown to the police, who's trying to stage this, they would have just screwed the silencer off and left it on the floor by her body. No, this person wanted to keep the silencer. So he, of course, walks it all the way over to the closet on a different floor where Dad kept his guns. Right? The silencer, by the way, is not found by the cops. It's found by, extended family member days later. Right? The cops didn't do the best job of investigation, but this is Essex. This isn't London. Right? The police force isn't a sophisticated police force. They made mistakes. But understand, the biggest mistakes made that night were made by the killer. So no, I don't believe someone with mental health problems would fire over 20 shots and not miss anybody. I don't believe a mother who, loved her kids, brings the kids over to mom and dad's, would kill the kids as they slept in their bed. Right? I don't believe the sister did the crime. I think if the sister wanted to commit suicide, she would have found a way to do so, given the efficiency of the other killings, with one shot, not two. I believe this is the brother who got convicted, right? Whose girlfriend claims that he openly talked about wanting to pull off a crime exactly like this. I believe it's the brother who was eliminating all the other heirs to his parents' estate, so he could, of course, live the life he wanted. As the sole heir, he's already going to, places in London. He's already, out, using coke at parties. He's already living the life he's fantasized about. He wasn't going to be stuck on a farm. Right? So he set this up in such a way where he's not over at the house, supposedly, when the killings take place. Because understand, if they were all supposed to meet there for dinner and stuff like that, then you'd have to explain why everyone else got murdered except you. No, he has it framed perfectly, where he's someplace else. He claims Dad, instead of calling the cops, called him when sister's waving a gun around. Right? Think about it. Right? Then, of course, as the cops arrive and he supposedly arrives at the place, he's able to immediately tell the cops, hey, my sister, who has a mental health history, had this gun and was threatening people to the point where The cops themselves waited hours before entering the building. So Jeremy Bamber, and understand, 2 jurors thought he was not guilty. But, in the UK, 10-2 was enough to convict him. Right? Jeremy Bamber blew it because he didn't think about his sister's nails. He didn't think about the implausibility of his sister killing herself with a rifle with the silencer attached to the gun, which made the gun too long for her to logistically do so. He didn't realize that, leaving a wet silencer in the gun room that had traces of blood inside the silencer was a mistake, because it showed that the silencer was used and the silencer was then removed from the gun. Also, he didn't think through the fact that his sister's supposed to have placed the gun without the silencer, if you believe the way the scene was staged, up against her body. But yet none of her blood was found in the gun's barrel. The forensics didn't back the staging. Right? He's the one who had the motive to do the crime. He's the one who called the cops with the questionable story of his father calling him, nervous about his sister waving a gun around at the house. Right? So Bamber's where he belongs. I find it interesting, too, that he hasn't given a lot of interviews. Why not? Right? If you're wrongly convicted of a crime that takes place when you're not even there, one would think this guy would be out welcoming every opportunity that he has to talk with the press. You would think this guy would be out, addressing what he claims are lies from his girlfriend. Right? So just understand, family business burglarized. Girlfriend claims she did it with him, has information about how the crime was committed. You would think Jeremy Bamber would be out, thinking, wow, I didn't do this. If she was there without me, that might help my appeal, quite frankly. Let me, check every rock, talk with every friend I have to find out what I was doing at that day and time. Because if he could paint a chief witness against him as a liar, that would help his case. Folks, that's not what he's done. Right? There are hardly any interviews of the guy. And this crime happened years ago. Right? So I believe Bamber is guilty. If you believe Bamber is innocent, give us your theory on how the silencer ends up back in the gun room. Right? Do you believe that after killing 4 people, Sheila then takes off the silencer? Maybe she has a motive. She wants to kill herself, realizes that the silencer makes the gun too long. So she decides to take off the silencer, and even though she's about to kill herself, she wants to be considerate to her brother. So she takes the silencer and leaves the silencer in the gun room. Is that what you believe? That she thought the brother would think it was, really considerate of her after killing his nephews to leave the silencer behind so he could use it on future, hunting trips or what have you? I don't find that believable. Right? Do you think that dad would call the son who's not there with the rest of the family instead of calling the cops. Right? Dad shot 8 times. Folks, if someone outside the family showed up, right, I don't think logistically a hitman in the house would use 8 bullets on Dad, right? The idea is, if I'm here hired to kill the family, or if I'm upset, right? You know, the daughter had an estranged husband. If I'm upset and, someone's hired me to kill the family, I believe a hitman, after a couple of shots to the back of the head, would think to themselves, this 61-year-old must be dead. Let me move on to victim number 2. Right? Let's go one step further, too. If it's a hitman who no one knows, right? If they kill mom and dad and the 6-year-olds are asleep, and they kill Sheila, the mother, and the 6-year-olds are asleep, there's no need to kill them. The 6-year-olds don't know who the guy is anyway. Right? You would think the guy would then just leave. It's not an outsider. It's an insider. It's an insider who wants to frame his sister, who wants to save the silencer, who hasn't thought about the sister's nails, who has enough rage built up over the years where 2, 3, 4, 6, 7 bullets on Dad are not enough. I believe the killer here is clearly Jeremy Bamber. I would have voted guilty. Let me hear from you in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.